If we see some sunshine, could get up to 28, 29 Celsius, and still pretty warm and humid generally across England and Wales. But we're going to see more cloud thickening across Northern Ireland this evening, some heavy bursts of rain here, and eastern parts of Scotland seeing some heavy rain as we go towards midnight. Overnight, we'll see a few more showers drifting into northwest England, but further south it does stay dry. It won't be as warm and humid as recent nights, but still temperatures in towns and cities staying in the mid-teens across the southeast. On to Thursday, and across the northern half of the country, it's a case of sunny spells and showers. Further south, well, if you're after rain, I don't think we're going to see much at all. Not many showers getting in here. It stays dry, fine and sunny. And even further north, the showers tending to fade, except across the far north of Scotland, where temperatures will still be in the mid-teens at best. Further south, it will be fresher, less humid. Temperatures closer to average, low to mid-20s. During Thursday evening, still a few showers across northern Scotland, some for Northern Ireland, but otherwise most places remaining dry. And dry is the theme as we head into the weekend, because here comes high pressure slowly ambling in from the Atlantic. Weather fronts will bring some patchy rain to western Scotland, but otherwise the dry weather is likely to continue into the early part of next week.
I'm Alex Phillips. Join me weekdays between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock for We Need to Talk About.
We don't need to apologise for our point of view.
Things have got to change. We're going to be covering topics that other broadcasters wouldn't dare to air. And there's a lot out there that definitely needs discussion. So join me on GB News between 2 and 3 o'clock on weekdays.
Tonight on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Esther McVeigh and here's what's coming on over the next hour. The government says it wants to level up the UK, but Liz Truss's plans to pay public sector's workers less in the regions, now abandoned, was seen by some as levelling down. I'll talk to Ben Houchin, Conservative Mayor of Tees Valley, who described the policy as Truss's dementia tax moment. And whoever becomes the next Prime Minister will face huge challenges. I'll discuss the most pressing issues they'll face on day one with Kit Malthouse, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. And I'll talk to Labour MP Graham Stringer about the infighting in his party. It's not just the Tories arguing amongst themselves. And here at GB News, we like to celebrate British success. So we're talking tech as the Instagram boss abandons Silicon Valley for London. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. So email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12 o'clock. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Fears over security have delayed ballot papers being sent out for the Conservative leadership election. The party said it had changed its plans for the vote after consulting with intelligence and security. The intelligence organisation has warned hackers could change people's votes. Meanwhile, a recent YouGov poll shows support for Rishi Sunak has dropped from 31% to 26%, while support for Liz Truss has increased. Speaking to GB News this morning, Conservative MP Brandon Lewis said he's backing Liz Truss.
There is only one poll that actually counts, and that's the poll of party members. The votes that party members like myself and others will cast over the next few days as those come out. Look, I don't know the details of obviously what's been happening in CCHQ, but I do think that it's their credit that they've made sure that we've got a process that is secure. We've got to make sure it is, and I think it's good that they've done that. The focus has got to be for us on giving people positive reasons to vote, to go out and vote for the next leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. My argument is that should be Liz Truss.
Brandon Lewis there. Archie Battersby's parents have submitted an application to the European Court of Human Rights in a bid to postpone the withdrawal of his life support. The 12-year-old's treatment was due to end at 11 o'clock this morning unless his family submitted the application by 9 a.m. Bart's Health NHS Trust says it'll make no changes to his care until the legal issues are resolved. Archie was found unconscious in his home in April and was declared brain stem dead by doctors. Speaking outside the Royal London Hospital, Archie's mother said she'll continue fighting.
If this country can't treat him, or they're not willing to treat him, where is the harm in allowing him to go to another country? I promised Arch, the same with his dad, that we'll fight till the bitter end, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to fight for the right for my son to live.
Senior US politician Nancy Pelosi has left Taiwan following a controversial visit. The Speaker of the House of Representatives met with the country's president during the 24-hour trip, which has been strongly condemned by China. Earlier, Beijing said it will hold a series of live-fire military drills in the air and sea around the island from tomorrow. The country is self-ruled, but is seen as a breakaway province by China. In what is being seen as a showing of solidarity with the island, Ms. Pelosi said the US would not abandon the island. The first shipment carrying food out of Ukraine has anchored in the Black Sea off Turkey's coast. The ship, which is carrying around 26,000 tons of corn to Lebanon, departed Odessa's port on Monday. It's the first ship carrying food to leave the port of Odessa since the Russian invasion. President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the news. He says the goal is now to have regularity with boats leaving every day. In an exclusive interview with GB News, Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the Defence Select Committee, said the cost of living crisis in the UK is directly related to Ukraine.
The cost of living crisis that we're experiencing here is directly consequential to the fact that grain cannot get out of Odessa. That is ground zero when it comes to the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, being able to feed not just its own country, but Africa and indeed Europe as well. Get that grain moving, and then grain prices, food prices then drop. That affects the cost of living. You sort out Ukraine, oil and gas prices will lower as well.
Tobias Ellwood speaking there. Now, the US state of Kansas has voted to keep protecting abortion rights. Almost 60% of voters rejected a state constitutional amendment that would have declared there is no right to abortion. US President Joe Biden welcomed the decision. It's the first referendum of its kind since the US Supreme Court overturned the historic Roe v. Wade case that legalized abortion nationwide. The UK looks set to enter a recession which will hit millions of the most vulnerable households. That's according to new data. The report from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research warned of a three-quarter technical recession, but a relatively shallow one. Gross domestic product is set to shrink in the fourth quarters of the year and in the first 3 months of next year. Major retailers are being accused of failing to reduce petrol prices in line with falling wholesale costs. The RAC says the wholesale cost of fuel has fallen by 20 pence since early June, but UK retailers continued to increase prices in June and only dropped their pump prices by an average of 9p during July. This means drivers could be spending an average £9 a tank more than they should be. And the Premier League has announced clubs will no longer take the knee before every match. Instead, the gesture will now be used in what they're calling specific moments throughout the season in order to amplify the message that racism has no place in football or society. The gesture started in June 2020 in solidarity for the Black Lives Matter campaign. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens now. It's back to the briefing.
Hello again. Yes, yesterday's short-lived proposal from Liz Truss for regional pay boards, which could see public sector workers being paid less than those living in London, went down like a ton of bricks. For a government who talks about levelling up, it seemed to many to be the exact opposite. Well, one of those who was left speechless, his words not mine, is Ben Houchen, Conservative Mayor of the Tees Valley, and he joins me now. So speechless was at the start of your tweet, and you ended with so much work that we've done in places like Teesside would be undone. How?
Well, it would be undone on the basis that Boris Johnson, who came up with a fantastic policy of levelling up, which led to that huge majority that we got in 2019, as well as obviously delivering Brexit, would completely be undone. You can't go into a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis and say to the people of largely the north of England, but also in places like the southwest, and say, actually, because you're a teacher and you happen to be based in the north, irrespective of doing the same job as counterparts in the southeast, that you should be paid less. And it would just ultimately undo the huge amount of work that we've done since Brexit, where we've attracted first-time Labour voters to vote Conservative. That was accelerated under Boris Johnson. It just seemed like a really bad idea. And fundamentally, the most important thing is that Liz and her campaign have realised that. They've rowed back from it, which means it's not happening. And then we can move on to the more important discussions about the detailed policy of what each contender is offering the country.
She also said, Liz Truss also said, when she did reverse that policy, as you rightly say, that it was people willfully misinterpreting her policy that she put out. So were you one of those people who willfully misinterpreted what she said?
Well, I'm sure I'll leave it to you, Esther, and to your viewers to look at the press release that Liz's team put out, the articles that have been written, and they can see in black and white for themselves who's misrepresenting who and what was actually said in that release. I'm just more, I think it's more important to talk about the fact that fundamentally it was a bad policy. We also have to recognise that everybody makes mistakes. You know, I'm not perfect. Irrespective of what they like to think, Rishi and Liz are not perfect, and I'm pleased that she's just recognised the mistake and has rowed back from what would have been a very damaging policy to large parts of the north. But like I say, other parts of the country as well, who see lower than average living standards that fundamentally would have meant that you would have had lower pay, and that didn't seem like a policy that a Conservative government should be taking forward, because we are ultimately a united kingdom. We're all part of the same community, and we should all be in this together.
Now, I was speaking to the Taxpayers Alliance yesterday, and what they were saying about it, and I just wonder if you see if there's any value in what they were trying to put forward. They were saying that public sector pay in the regions was sort of high in proportion to what the private sector could pay. And if you think that the private sector drives the economy, those are the ones creating wealth in the regions, there was, as they perceived it, an argument to reduce the public sector pay because the private sector couldn't compete with it because it was, in a way, distorting the wages. So do you think there is any argument for what Liz was putting forward in that announcement?
I mean, I can understand the academic argument in the same way that by following the economists' argument, what we should just be doing is spending all of our money in London and the South East, and nowhere else should get any more money, because ultimately the taxpayer would get its biggest bang for its buck by continuing to invest in places that have already had huge investment. That's the purpose of politics, right? We also know that you cannot do politics by just reading a textbook. And that's what levelling up's all about. Levelling up is this idea that areas that have been left behind for decades under governments of both colours haven't had the investment and the attention that they need and deserve. And this is the same element of it, because actually what you're doing is you're double penalising, because the reason that the private sector hasn't been able to thrive in areas like the north of England as much as they have, certainly post kind of industrial decline of areas like Teesside as an example, means that the private sector hasn't been able to thrive. Now, unless there is some sort of assistance and help to be able to allow that to be restarted, then you're never going to change anything, because that government kind of treasury orthodoxy that Liz rallies against will always mean that the more prosperous areas get more funding. And also there is a final point to make that in areas like Teesside, and you'll know, Esther, in places like the Northwest as well, there are deprived areas that already pay the same amount to teachers in the north as they do in the south. And it's actually really difficult to recruit. And the scarcity of those types of talents to recruit into these areas is already difficult enough. So reducing that pay is going to be even more difficult. And then what do you do? Because if you've got young people who are coming out of school who aren't educated because we can't find the right quality of teacher because nobody wants to go into the profession in parts of the north of England, means, well, you're not skilling people to be able to do work in the private sector, to grow the private sector, which ultimately contributes back to the economy. So it's an overly simplistic argument. It's like with anything in life, there are huge grey areas, but it just felt to me the overarching policy of levelling up, which is something we all buy into, would have been damaged by having a regional pay board policy.
And you are most definitely a champion of levelling up, and you certainly are a champion of the Tees Valley area, without doubt, as you've looked for inward investment to come to your area. So what I'd like to say is, what policies would you like to see from whichever candidate, whoever becomes the new Prime Minister, what would you like to see that you think actually would deliver that levelling up?
Well, one of the things that I've already done, Esther, is we've asked both leadership contenders to sign up to what I've called as a minimum pledge for levelling up. And I'm pleased to say that both contenders have signed up to that pledge. And that includes things like more devolution.
I'm just going to jump in there, Ben. You're not somebody who usually asks for a minimum pledge. You're somebody who's fighting for the big, big picture. So I don't know why you've asked for a minimum pledge, but go on. What would you like to see ideally?
Well, a minimum pledge is because actually, Esther, the things we have to tackle as part of levelling up and being able to increase prosperity across large parts of the north of England are very, very complex. And there are lots of different things. We could talk about infrastructure through to education, through to culture. It's a very, very complex thing. So we kind of said, look, there are some fundamental strands that if you can sign up to it, at least shows that you are genuinely committed to the agenda. We didn't want to write a war and peace on what levelling up should be and ask them to commit to every single minute detail. So the 5-point plan as a minimum was around further devolution. So where we already have metro mayors, to give them more power and autonomy over decision making, because we all know that locally based politicians and democratically elected people are better able to provide better answers to their local area. We want more metro mayors, and I think that's a good thing, because I think having more devolution across the UK rather than being dictated to from London and Whitehall is a good thing. Then there was work around, it's a more technical point, but around the Green Book, because there is still huge discrimination in the Treasury, active discrimination against infrastructure projects in the north of England compared to those in the south, largely because of that Treasury orthodoxy we've talked about. And then there was a specific commitment, because I think it was as a poster child of levelling up, I think it's important that both contenders signed up to it, was the full implementation of Northern Powerhouse Rail. And I'm pleased to say that both contestants in the race to be Prime Minister have signed up to that, which is fantastic. So they both deserve to be praised for it. But there's a lot more that can be done, right? And you and I, Esther, have spoken about this at length. It's a very complex thing, but what we can't afford is to dispense with the amazing work that Boris did over the last few years. And if it was up to me, we probably wouldn't be having this leadership contest, but we are where we are.
OK. Ben Houchen, thank you so much indeed for joining us today. So whoever ends up moving into number 10 Downing Street on the 6th of September is going to face huge challenges. A cost of living crisis, strikes, a war in Europe, to name only a few. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Kit Malthouse, Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Because, Kit, it's down to you, and I know you've got a lot of, as they call it, summer recess work there. You're the person now gathering together what the Prime Minister is going to confront on day one. I think you've called them, is it white whales that are around and about?
Sorry? Killer whales.
Killer whales, killer whales. This is what you're working on that they're going to confront. So can you tell us what they are that they're going to have to do, whoever the Prime Minister is, day one?
Well, you're quite right, Esther, that as Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, I head what's called the Cabinet Office, which is a department that sits at the heart of government, basically the kind of engine of delivery for our Prime Minister. And what I'm trying to do over the summer is to prepare that engine. So when the person is selected, either Rishi or Liz, that they're able to really put their foot on the accelerator and move away quickly. And I guess there are sort of three aspects to that job. The first is kind of gripping the day-to-day, what I've called the swarm of wasps that is around us. And that is the sort of situational stuff that we face. So you will have seen, just a week or so ago, we had this problem with this heat wave, 2-day heat wave across the whole of the UK, causing major problems, right? We had to make sure that public services were stood up, everybody was ready, that the communication was there for the public. And actually, we did sadly see a number of homes destroyed, and some young people, particularly, who died in water-related incidents, not necessarily the heat. But actually, most of that worked really, really well. And, the public responded to the messaging, dealing with those kind of day-to-day things. The travel disruption, the first weekend of summer, we saw a lot of disruption, particularly at Dover and Folkestone. This following weekend, we haven't seen that. The system worked, touch wood, reasonably well. That comes about off a lot of public sector and private sector work together to get the system working. So there's that, gripping the day-to-day. The second area is then preparing for what's coming in the autumn, and that is looking at some of the really big challenges that we face as a country. So the cost of living crisis that is going to get possibly worse in the autumn, particularly as we see fuel and energy price rises feeding through into the energy price cap. Right? What does the playbook that a prime minister needs on day one look like for that? From our point of view, what are the structural things we can do to try and improve? But also, what can we do from a Treasury point of view to help if the prime minister or whoever is chancellor wants to help? And I need to get that work ready. Alongside the work that we're doing, for example, on cost of living, you'll know we've got this great guy, David Buttress, who's our cost of living czar, working with the private sector, talking about
I'm
needing
to get to what these killer whales are. What are the big things, though? Go on, that's the next one.
So the third area is then what are those really big projects across government, which I call killer whales, which could surface at any moment and rip a prime minister's arm off, financially or operationally. And there are a number of those. I mean, the example that I've used in the past is HS2, right? HS2 is making lots of progress. You will know in your part of the world, it's coming out of the ground. There's lots of work going on.
Look, I wouldn't go on about HS2, Kit. A lot of us don't want it. What a waste of money, but go on.
Well, it's obviously a project which has potential, as they say, to go over budget and to be...
It's already gone over budget. It's tripled. It's already over budget. You mean more over budget?
So have we got the right controls on that? Similarly, in my old job at the Home Office, I was in charge of a project to replace the radio network for the emergency services, right? This is costing billions of pounds to do this project. Again, it was one that I inherited that was over budget and over time. Are we getting that back under control? You will know that we're trying to extract ourselves from quite a lot of PFI projects signed by previous governments. How is that looking? There's lots of those kind of big projects out there, which while we've instituted them, we've put them they're underway. Have we got the right control? They often take sophisticated management, quite difficult decisions, but they could blow the budget if we're not careful. And so identifying them is the third part of the job.
Now, Kit, there's one other thing, and you'll have seen how popular Boris Johnson still is. Even in a poll out today, lots of people saying they'd like him still as the Prime Minister. 40% for Boris, 28% for Liz, 23% for Rishi there. So what they want to know is, will the government, and whoever comes in as the new Prime Minister, continue with what Boris set in motion?
Well, Esther, you and I, and indeed both the candidates for the leadership, were elected on a manifesto in 2019. And that manifesto attracted, a huge majority in Parliament, 14 million people that voted for it. And so that manifesto still has to be delivered. And while obviously we were blown off course by the pandemic that affected so many parts of our society, that democratic mandate, that legitimacy for the mandate still holds true. Now, obviously, when a ship is in sail, you have to tack and move your sails according to the wind. And we've had to do the same as some of the very, very stiff winds and storms have buffeted the country.
Is this a nice way of saying that new, fresh thought is needed or will be implemented?
Well, very often what you find with a manifesto is that the policies are proposed to deal with a particular problem. But when you actually confront that problem or new problems arise, you have to change accordingly. So, for example, as I say, the manifesto did not include dealing with a pandemic. That pandemic has resulted in significant backlogs, for example, in the National Health Service. We are obviously having to divert lots of resource to that, and one of my jobs is to make sure that the Health Service in particular is dealing with the backlog and preparing for the winter. That's another one of those pressures that's coming down the line, and that involves tacking both financially and from a policy point of view to try and deal with those issues as well. So we need to, I think you are right, those leadership candidates need to have the manifesto in their back pocket. That's what we all voted for in 2019. But at the same time, be agile about addressing the real world problems that are coming down the track on an almost daily basis.
Kit, I'm going to have to bring this interview to an end. I hope that we can have you back on to discuss this in further detail. But you have no summer holiday. Quick one-word answer. Did you draw the short straw for this job?
Well, no, actually. I think it's a great job to be there. I am having a busy summer, although I hope to have a break with my family. But let's see how the summer goes. It's one of those jobs where even if I am travelling, I can't travel too far.
And what most people might not know is we've known each other a long, long time. So I say, I'm glad they've got a Scouser doing this job, Kit.
We have known each other since we were teenagers, Esther. I still remember those teenage discos. Great to see you.
I was the better dancer. Thanks a lot, Kit. Right, so a new poll of Tory members gives Liz Truss a whopping 34% lead over Rishi Sunak. But will yesterday's policy fiasco hurt her, as well as voting being delayed? Back to discuss that after this short break.
As the race for number 10 intensifies, we are giving you the chance to get to know our next Prime Minister. We've invited the two candidates to meet you, the GB News viewers, and let you put your questions to them. Head directly to gbnews.uk or send me your questions to questions@gbnews.uk. It all kicks off at 5 o'clock next Wednesday with Liz Truss on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back. It's 12:25. Now, after Liz Truss's dreadful day yesterday, Sunak's team may have had a spring in their step. But now a new poll of Tory members finds Truss has increased her lead, and 60% of the members plan to vote for her. But as ballot papers are now delayed, is there any way that Sunak might still become Prime Minister in September? Joining us now is our political correspondent, Tom Harvard. So, you know, like they say, a week's a long time in politics. Everything's been changing back and forth, back and forth. So, bad day, though, for Liz yesterday, that U-turn.
Certainly, and they say a week's a long time. Well, the last 24 hours have been a veritable roller coaster.
It was 12 hours was a long time, because that's how long it took for that U-turn.
That was the speediest U-turn I've ever seen in British politics. But but then it seemed like Liz's fortunes turned round last night with this new poll, although the caveat, of course, is that this YouGov poll, which puts her on 60%, Rishi on 24%, taking out the don't knows, she's on 70% to Rishi's 30%, that poll was conducted before the U-turn. So potentially that might have knocked her chances a little bit. But just to recall what happened yesterday, or indeed the night before this policy was announced, well, part of a broader policy on cutting Whitehall waste was the idea that civil servant pay shouldn't outstrip private sector pay for comparable jobs in different regions, and that was supposed to save a bunch of money. But then the policy went further, saying it could apply to the whole public sector, and that's where you got these attacks from the Labour Party, the TUC, and the Rishi Sunak campaign on nurses, on doctors, on policemen and the like.
Yeah, because to get the money, the 8.8 billion, which was a very specific amount, they could work out that couldn't have just been a small bit, that was extending to everybody.
Yes, and so the contention there, and what the Rishi Sunak campaign did, was divide that 8.8 billion by the number of people in the public sector across the regions outside of London and the South East, and you get about £1,500 per employee that would be taken away. What the Liz Truss campaign then tried to come back with was saying, well, this wouldn't be an immediate thing, this would be a long-term ambition, and we'd do it through differential pay rises. But by that time, when you're explaining, you're losing. And what happened clearly within the Liz Truss camp was they thought, this is just not going to work, we've lost the argument on this, it's too difficult to try and come back, to try and explain. Even the idea of differential pay rises over the long term in the future, that does look like we're giving more to the south than the other parts of the country.
And it seems they'd forgotten simple things like there is also London waiting. There's already more money gets paid in London, so they sort of forgot, it seems to be, about that, as well as they put out a policy which had been put forward many, many times and rejected many, many times. But, as you say, the poll is opening up. Things could be getting interesting.
That's certainly true. There's been now 3 polls of Conservative Party members, 2 from YouGov. Now, YouGov has got a fairly good track record with this. They got it fairly close with Boris Johnson. They got it almost bang on with Jeremy Corbyn, back when people weren't believing the polls, and we saw these big leads for Jeremy Corbyn in 2015 when he was standing to be Labour Party leader. It turned out to be right. YouGov have the most enormous lead for Liz Truss, although a little caveat there that this was before the wobble that she had yesterday. There's another polling company, an Italian polling company, that had Liz Truss on a 5-point lead, so a much narrower lead at the start of this week. That was reported in the Times.
That was a very unusual polling, that, wasn't it? It was supposedly, as I read into it, not done by Team Liz, but they were sharing the information with Team Liz. And you know as well as I do, what do you do if you want to make sure you win? You frequently say the polls are narrowing, because that forces out your voters. So it was very interesting, that poll. Just when you needed to make sure your people vote, you say the gap has narrowed.
Yes, it's interesting. Now, I asked directly the Liz Truss campaign whether or not they commissioned this poll. They said, no, we did not commission this poll. We do not know who commissioned this poll. Also, it's an interesting one, because this Italian company that did it hasn't polled the Conservative Party membership before. I've spoken to pollsters from a number of other companies saying it would be very difficult to do so because they don't have the tables and the pool of people that they would normally go to. But we can see another poll we're expecting at the start of next week, this time from Opinium, who have polled Conservative members before, comparing the Opinium poll that's coming out, I think, on Monday with the YouGov one from last night. We might get a more clear picture of the direction of travel.
Tom, if there's anybody to give us a clear picture, it's you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us again today. Now, earlier on Breakfast, Mark Longhurst and Isabel Webster asked Brandon Lewis, a former cabinet minister who's backing Liz Truss, about yesterday's U-turn on public sector pay. Let's have a quick watch.
So look, we've seen Rishi Sunak's team sort of flip-flop around on 9 different things in the last couple of weeks. What Liz outlined yesterday was a package around dealing with Whitehall waste. Within that was this idea around what you do with new people coming into the civil service who are working around the country. But she's been clear that we're not going to take that part of it forward. But we do need to deal with Whitehall waste because that's something that is about how we spend taxpayers' money efficiently and effectively to get the outcomes we want for citizens across the UK.
But she was clear that she wanted it, in that it was a press release that the reporters went through with a fine-tooth comb and realised that this would mean teachers, firefighters, others, nurses, even in the public sector, would also have their pay docked. How on earth was that allowed to go out when no one saw the dangers?
Well, no, look, actually, if you look at the wording of the release, what it outlined was if you were to do this across the board, but Liz was very clear, that was never the case. We were never going to be dealing with or changing the pay of people who are working in the public sector.
Then why withdraw it then?
COVID, particularly the challenges of that. What she was looking at and what was outlined and what was being looked at was what you do about new people coming into the civil service, new contracts as they come in. But Liz was clear yesterday, we're not going to take that part of the package forward, but the wider package around dealing with Whitehall waste, dealing with the fact we've seen the civil service grow by about 91,000 over the last couple of years is something the government does need to deal with. The current Prime Minister's been clear about that. The Treasury have tasked all of us, I was tasked as a Secretary of State to deal with that within our department. So we do need to do that.
The Conservatives are fighting amongst themselves and Labour are doing the same. I'll talk with Labour MP Graham Stringer next. And we're celebrating the UK's success as a global tech hub as the boss of Instagram moves from Silicon Valley to London. But here, first, is the news with Simon.
Thanks, Esther. It's just gone 12:30. I'm Simon Pusey in the GB newsroom. Fears over security have delayed ballot papers being sent out for the Conservative leadership election. The party said it had changed its plans for the vote after consulting with government intelligence and security. The intelligence organisation has warned hackers could change people's votes. The ballots were due to be sent out from Monday, but could now arrive as late as August the 11th. Archie Battersby's parents have submitted an application to the European Court of Human Rights in a bid to postpone the withdrawal of his life support. The 12-year-old's treatment was due to end at 11 o'clock this morning unless his family submitted the application by 9 a.m. Archie was found unconscious at his home in April and was declared brain-stem dead by doctors. Speaking in the last few minutes outside the Royal London Hospital, Archie's mother said she will continue fighting. Senior US politician Nancy Pelosi has left Taiwan following a controversial visit there. The Speaker of the House of Representatives met with the country's president during the 24-hour trip, which has been strongly condemned by China. Earlier, Beijing said it will hold a series of live-fire military drills in the air and sea around the island from tomorrow. Just Stop Oil protesters have been served with a National Highways injunction which covers the M25 for blocking major roads. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, tweeted the demonstrators could face a fine or imprisonment if they breach it, blocking roads again. He said, "We will not stand by while lives are put at risk and roads are ground to a halt." And the Premier League has announced clubs will no longer take the knee before every match. Instead, the gesture will be used in what they're calling specific moments throughout the season in order to amplify the message that racism has no place in football or society. The gesture started in June 2020 in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter campaign. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Esther.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets then. The pound is 1.219 to the dollar. The pound is 1.196 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,447.14 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A messy picture out there today, some sunshine, quite a lot of cloud, a few showers. It is turning cooler, but it is going to be another very warm and humid day across East Anglia and the southeast. That's where the warmth persists. Elsewhere, we've got this weather front slowly sinking southwards, introducing cooler and fresher air, but also introducing quite a lot of cloud in this zone from the Wash down towards Dorset, Hampshire, seeing a few showers that'll edge towards Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. Further north, we've got some showers drifting in as well, hit and miss affairs. There'll be some breaks in the clouds, some sunny spells across parts of northern England and parts of southwest England too. And across the southeast, with the warm air here, if we see some sunshine, could get up to 28, 29 Celsius, and still pretty warm and humid generally across England and Wales. But we're going to see more cloud thickening across Northern Ireland this evening, some heavy bursts of rain here, and eastern parts of Scotland seeing some heavy rain as we go towards midnight. Overnight, we'll see a few more showers drifting into northwest England, but further south it does stay dry. It won't be as warm and humid as recent nights, but still temperatures in towns and cities staying in the mid-teens across the southeast. On to Thursday, and across the northern half of the country, it's a case of sunny spells and showers. Further south, well, if you're after rain, I don't think we're going to see much at all. Not many showers getting here. It stays dry, fine and sunny. And even further north, the showers tending to fade, except across the far north of Scotland, where temperatures will still be in the mid-teens at best. Further south, it will be fresher, less humid. Temperatures closer to average, low to mid-20s. During Thursday evening, still a few showers across northern Scotland, some for Northern Ireland, but otherwise most places remaining dry. And dry is the theme as we head into the weekend, because here comes high pressure slowly ambling in from the Atlantic. Weather fronts will bring some patchy rain to western Scotland, but otherwise the dry weather is likely to continue into the early part of next week.
Yeah, welcome back. It's now 12:39. Now, the Conservative Party is indulging in a bit of blue-on-blue warfare over who should be the next Prime Minister. But over in the Labour Party, there's plenty of disagreement too, especially on whether its MPs should be seen to be sporting strike action on the railway workers after Shadow Transport Secretary Sam Tarry was sacked last week. Levelling Up Minister, though, Lisa Nandy, appears to have got away with visiting the picket line. Joining me now is Graham Stringer, Labour MP for Blackley and Broughton. So, Graham, do you know what the rules are? Would you be safe to go to a picket line? Who can go there, who cannot?
I've been on plenty of picket lines, and I think Labour MPs will go, and I think the rules allow them to go. I think for those MPs who are on the front bench, they have collective responsibility, and the leader has asked them not to go. I think that's a mistake, because the history of the Labour Party is that when people are trying to fight to save their standards of living and their conditions at a workplace, Labour MPs, whether they're on the front bench or not, instinctively want to go and support them, and will do. So I think it was a mistake to hand out that instruction. You say Sam Tarry was sacked for going on a picket line. Sam Tarry, I think, chose to get himself sacked for doing interviews which had not been authorised. As a member of the front bench team, you have to get authority before you do interviews, and you have to toe the line. And he didn't. He wasn't sacked for going on a picket line. He was sacked for not abiding by collective responsibility. And I think he wanted to be sacked because he's going through a rather difficult reselection process.
Great. I was going to ask that because how it came across, he did an interview or he spoke out of turn, as it were. It did sound like, Keir Starmer was dancing on a pinhead, and that wasn't the truth. And I didn't know if that was Keir looking for an excuse to get rid of him or whether Sam wanted to. So do you think that's what it was, really?
Yeah, I think the Labour Party has always had a sympathy for people who rebel against the leadership. They tend to be party members tend to be fonder of rebels than they are of the leadership. Sam is going through a reselection process to be the candidate in the next general election in his Ilford seat. And I don't think it will do him any harm to have been disciplined by the leader. So that's what it looks like to me from a distance, as though he wanted to be sacked.
It seems to me, though, Keir's got himself into a little bit of a muddle, because I looked at Keir's 10 pledges, how he became the leader, and one of them was working shoulder to shoulder with the trade unions. And then on a quote that he put out, he goes, Labour's party is in opposition, but really it needs to be the party in power, and a party in government does not go on picket lines. It's a government that tries to resolve disputes. So is that his problem? Keir doesn't know which way he's facing now. Is he using the promises which he became the leader of the Labour Party for, or is he going to use what he's thinking he needs to do to become the leader of the country?
I think he's making a substantial point that if Labour was in government, and it looks more likely now than it did 2 years ago, that we could win the next election, then if people go on strike in the public sector against the Labour government, it would look very strange if government ministers were picketing against themselves. So I think that's a substantial point. The world has changed quite dramatically, partly because of COVID, but mainly because of the war in Ukraine and the inflation that's followed it. So I'm not surprised that Keir is responding to those changes. I'm disappointed in his stance on public ownership. I think some of the changes have been unnecessary. Some are in response to a changing world situation.
We might need a quick answer here, Graham, because to everybody else it just looks a bit weak, doesn't it? Sam Tarry's not allowed to do something. Lisa Nandy is allowed to do something. He's sort of just falling, as it were, or going with the wind. And, is that really what it's about? He's a weak leader of your party.
No, I think quite the reverse. Sam Tarry was not, as I understand it, sacked for going on a picket line. He was sacked for not following the rules on collective responsibility, which all front bench spokespeople have to do.
Graham Stringer, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Now, it often feels like there's not much good news around, but here on GB News, we like to celebrate British success when we can. And today it's been announced that the boss of Instagram has abandoned Silicon Valley for London as our success as a tech hub grows. Well, joining me now is technology journalist Will Guyot to talk about just that. So is this big news?
Yeah, it's pretty big news in terms of the world of technology. Back in 2013, a couple of big senior Facebook bosses came to the UK and essentially masterminded the whole advertising product for Facebook from the UK. That's how Facebook has got as big and as powerful as it is now. There were UK engineers and there were UK experts working on those particular projects. Instagram has always had a small operation in London, but with Adam Mosseri coming to the UK, and it's also been reported today by the FT that Nick Clegg is also coming from Meta to return to the UK part of the time. This is making the UK even more important as a technology hub, and London in particular. I just think it's really exciting, and it will probably encourage lots of other tech companies to start looking to the UK for their homes for engineering.
And what does the UK have above what was happening in Silicon Valley? What is the draw?
Well, I think there's a great number of engineers who still love to come to the UK from across Europe. London's an exciting city to live. Lots of people come here and spend several years here. When I was working at Facebook in 2010s, my colleagues it was a really vibrant group of colleagues from countries all around the world who came and spent time in London. And increasingly, it's become an engineering hub for that company. Lots of Facebook's tech is now made in London, and we always think of them as a Silicon Valley company, but London has become incredibly important to them.
I will also add in the voice of the regions as well, because I know Liverpool, Manchester, all other places as well are tech hubs. But I want to ask you this question because I understand that we're now becoming the global leader in tech regulation. We're setting the tone. Do you think that has something to do with it as well, Guy?
Well, we've just kicked out the online harms bill, so I'm not entirely sure it's been kicked into the next part of Parliament. So I was quite excited about that coming through as a world leader, but now we have to wait and see what's happening with that. I think in terms of tech regulation, lots needs to be done, actually, and seemingly the companies seem to be heeding to the UK government's will right now. But what we actually need to do, we seem to have put a complete pause on this whilst there's this battle for leadership, and there's been no real clarification about what comes next. And I think I join most charities and organisations who say that the online harms bill looked quite well thought out. There was lots of things in there that could have benefited tech companies and kept people safe online. So I think we're all looking forward to seeing that coming back.
Will, there was another thing, I believe, that Adam Mosseri said, and that was about he felt the USA was becoming too fractionalised. And in that regard, Britain isn't. It is more sort of together and inclusive. Do you think that could have been another reason?
It's tricky to say that because you've still got this very much in the UK. You've got people who were for Brexit and against Brexit. So I still don't think we're particularly united as a country. But I know that there is this great divide in the US over, whether you're Republican or you're a Conservative. So from that perspective, I think there is a lot to encourage the tech companies back to the UK. And Facebook and Meta have always loved this country. And increasingly, I think it's going to be a really important place for it as it starts moving into virtual reality, augmented reality, and all these other new exciting forms of tech. And the UK can be a really big part of that.
Will Guyett, thank you very much indeed. And I think your opening words were the best. It's an exciting time. The UK is an exciting place to come to for tech. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the first ship carrying grain to leave the Ukrainian port of Odessa since the war started in February has been cleared to continue its journey. The Rozhany, which is now on its way to Lebanon, was allowed to leave Ukraine after a deal by Kyiv and Moscow aimed at alleviating the global food crisis. Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, has been speaking with Tobias Ellwood, the Conservative chairman of the Defence Select Committee. He revealed he was allowed to vote for Penny Mordaunt to be Tory leader despite losing the whip last month. Tom started by asking Tobias Ellwood, who was recently in Odessa, whether he thought the deal between Russia and the Ukraine to export grain would hold up.
Let's just connect the two big questions that you put to me today, which is domestic and now Ukraine, because they are interrelated. The cost of living crisis that we're experiencing here is directly consequential to the fact that grain cannot get out of Odessa. That is ground zero when it comes to the breadbasket of Europe, Ukraine, being able to feed not just its own country, but Africa and indeed Europe as well. Get that grain moving, and then grain prices, food prices then drop. That affects the cost of living. You sort out Ukraine, oil and gas prices will lower as well. But there isn't a general plan. Absolutely, we're supporting the Ukrainian people and the armed forces. Britain is doing more so than other countries, absolutely. But there isn't a clear plan as to how we stand up to Russia, that is weaponizing grain. So this plan that's just been agreed in Turkey, I'm afraid Russia's calling the shots. It's their agenda. And what I discovered in Odessa is actually there's appetite for a UN General Assembly resolution. Let's get a coalition of the willing to actually guard the maritime passage so that we control those shipping lanes, not Russia. My concern is that once about 70 ships that got caught up in Odessa prior to the start of the war, once they've departed with their grain, then Russia will have its sights on Odessa. For a long term, they wanted to actually take that city. It was part of the original Russia Empire. That's where I think their campaign after Odessa will head next. We've gained confidence. We're getting better at supporting Ukraine, but it's coming very, very late in the day. And let's recognize we still see NATO sitting on its hands. This most formidable, potent military alliance the world has ever seen. There's a fire in Ukraine and we won't put it out. And my concern is that fire will spread beyond Ukraine and we really will have to wake up. There's always risk when you take on an adversary, but there's also risk in doing nothing, allowing Russia to then not expand just in Ukraine, but where does it head to next? Prior to going to Odessa, I was in Moldova, next door, not part of NATO, very small country, very limited armed forces. They feel very, very vulnerable indeed. Look what's going on in Bosnia right now and in Kosovo. The stability in Eastern Europe is very precarious indeed. Why? Because Putin has recognized after our humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan that this is his moment. He's backed up by China, don't forget. I see those two coalescing, this axis of Russia and China dominating the next 10, 20, 30 years. There is a danger when it comes to leaving Ukraine on its own and not leaning into it more. Not necessarily boots on the ground. There are many ways, operationally, strategically, that we can support Ukraine. Let's not forget, we've got the head of the British Army here in the UK saying this is a 1937 moment. Look what happened there when we blinked.
This week we saw an American strike in Kabul, in the heart of Afghanistan, taking out the leader of Al-Qaeda. What does this say about the Western withdrawal from that area?
President Biden will be pretty pleased to be able to take out somebody that was directly involved in that attack on the USS Cole in the 80s, on 9/11 as well. Pivotal, one of the architects in some of the challenges that we've been facing over the last couple of decades in countering terrorism. But ultimately, it also reflects the perhaps futility of us walking away from Afghanistan, the way that the Taliban is now back in cahoots with Al-Qaeda. That's why we went into the country in the first place, to actually defeat Al-Qaeda. And here they are growing again, becoming a potent force, regrouping, rearming, retraining. That's what we're seeing, and taking advantage of a safe haven of Afghanistan. Now, they can do this over the horizon ops, if you like, as they did with the CIA drone strike, but you can't do that and actually kill this ideology. I think Osama bin Laden, I'm afraid, would probably be pleased to see that since his creation of Al-Qaeda in the 1980s, that ethos, that philosophy, that extremism has now spread across the world, mostly in Africa now, certainly in the Middle East, back in Afghanistan, causing problems for the West itself. We still don't have an answer, 20 odd years after 9/11, as to how to deal with somebody who then believes when they're indoctrinated that they're willing to take their lives thinking they're going to get a fast track to paradise because some extremist tells them that.
On a diplomatic level, how should the United Kingdom government engage with the Taliban?
So I went out to meet the Taliban leadership in Doha in Qatar, where they have their main international base. I did this a year ago, and it was very clear to me that they said privately that they hadn't got the ability to run a country. No chance whatsoever. We should recognize them. It's our fault that we handed power to them. Our perhaps hesitance in wanting to support the Taliban means the 40 million people that we've abandoned are now seriously suffering because of famine, food shortages and so forth.
Just finally, would that not risk legitimising this terrorist-adjacent state actor, legitimising and indeed funding the very people who put our way of life at risk?
That is the awful truth, the inconvenient problem that you then face. But whose problem is that? Ours. We abandoned Afghanistan. We walked away. We handed it back to the very insurgents that we went in to defeat. We've only got ourselves to blame there. We really need to wake up. We're entering very, very difficult times now, and there is simply not the international leadership. It really is like 1937. Absence of international institutions to hold errant nations to account, countries rearming, authoritarianism on the rise, and no leadership. No Roosevelt, there's no Churchill there on the horizon to grasp this.
That was Tobias Ellwood there, the chairman of the Defence Select Committee, speaking to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Now, I can't believe that our hour together has come to an end. Anyway, it has. But thanks for joining me. Join me again tomorrow. That's Esther McVeigh at noon tomorrow. But up next is On the Money with Nona Akua. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
Hello, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather updates. A messy picture out there today, some sunshine, quite a lot of cloud, a few showers. It is turning cooler, but it is going to be another very warm and humid day across East Anglia and the southeast. That's where the warmth persists. Elsewhere, we've got this weather front slowly sinking southwards, introducing cooler and fresher air, but also introducing quite a lot of cloud in this zone from the Wash down towards Dorset, Hampshire, seeing a few showers that'll edge towards Norfolk and Cambridgeshire. Further north, we've got some showers drifting in as well, hit and miss affairs. There'll be some breaks in the clouds, some sunny spells across parts of northern England and parts of southwest England too. And across the southeast, with the warm air here, if we see some sunshine, could get up to 28, 29 Celsius, and still pretty warm and humid generally across England and Wales. But we're going to see more cloud thickening across Northern Ireland this evening, some heavy bursts of rain here, and eastern parts of Scotland seeing some heavy rain as we go towards midnight. Overnight, we'll see a few more showers drifting into northwest England, but further south it does stay dry. It won't be as warm and humid as recent nights, but still temperatures in towns and cities staying in the mid-teens across the southeast. On to Thursday, and across the northern half of the country, it's a case of sunny spells and showers. Further south, well, if you're after rain, I don't think we're going to see much at all. Not many showers getting in here. It stays dry, fine and sunny. And even further north, the showers tending to fade, except across the far north of Scotland, where temperatures will still be in the mid-teens at best. Further south, it will be fresher, less humid. Temperatures closer to average, low to mid-20s. During Thursday evening, still a few showers.